We're going to go deep now on innovation, what it is, why it's important, and where we're at. So, what is it? Well, consumer needs and attitudes are always changing, and the pandemic has accelerated this process. So, we have to stay fresh and relevant in consumers' minds. You can advance it one click there. Good. It's not enough just to be the better product anymore. We have to be in sync with consumer interest. Go ahead and advance. We have to foster a culture of innovation within our organizations. Consumer-centric thinking must be firmly rooted in this culture. But we also need process and infrastructure and commitment. So innovation isn't just part of the culture, it is the culture. Next. And it's not just about one idea, but the management of a pipeline of new ideas. We need patience to nurture that pipeline along. Next. And yes, this is about warfare. It's about our survival. There are companies out there trying to eliminate animal agriculture altogether. Next. So consider this. Next, patents are a great indicator of the technology and ideas that are likely to define the future. Next. And investments are a great indicator of new business models or product concepts with the growth potential and the support to make it to market. Next. So it should be a sobering thought to consider the intellectual property being developed by our competitors. Despite COVID, plant and lab-grown dairy alternatives have been very active on the product innovation front, with 7 times as many patent applications as traditional dairy, and $8.1 billion in investment in the last year alone. So, if that's not enough to get you thinking about innovation, Steve Lerch is here to give us some high-tech perspective on innovation in the dairy industry. And you can transfer the slides over now. And just real quickly, Steve is a digital strategy and marketing consultant. He spent 9 years working at Google before founding StoryArc Consulting, where he helps brands build digital marketing strategies and better understand consumer behaviors in the modern world. Over the last 5 years, Steve has worked primarily in the food and agriculture space, including building Google's first relationships with the USDA checkoff programs, including the National Pork Board, American Egg Board, MilkPEP, and DMI. When not consulting, Steve speaks on topics like innovation, corporate culture, and consumer behavior. Take it away, Steve.
Awesome. Thank you, John. I hope everybody can hear me all right. I know doing this virtually is always kind of, everybody holds their breath and crosses their fingers, so bear with me. But yeah, you kind of just heard a little bit about myself. My name is Steve Lerch. I'm the president of StoryArc Consulting. I won't say too much else about myself because John kind of covered it. The only thing I'll add sort of in addition to the work John talked about, where I work in digital marketing and digital strategy with groups like DMI and MilkPEP and CMAB, when I was at Google, I also served as sort of a cultural evangelist is sort of one way to put it. In addition to my core role, I would get up and speak to groups of hundreds of new employees and talk to them sort of about the history, the culture, and the philosophy of how Google does things, the innovative approaches we took, and really why we would take them. And that's really what I want to focus on today, that last bit, especially as it pertains to the food and beverage space and as it pertains to the dairy industry. I want to focus on why steps must be taken now to really embrace innovation. So if you go ahead and go to the next slide, obviously coronavirus, Jennifer, can you click to the next slide? Hopefully the slides are going to, there we go. So obviously the coronavirus really changed our world in ways that none of us could have imagined, right? We've truly never seen anything like this, certainly not in our lifetimes. And just such an all-encompassing and global event that forced virtually everyone, and that's true, virtually everyone on the planet to change their daily behaviors and their consumption patterns in some way or another. But as much as we all like to talk about how unprecedented the coronavirus is, and it really is, and I'm the first to talk about that and how much it's changed the world, it also strikes me as I think about the coronavirus that this really isn't the first thing in my lifetime to totally change the world, to fundamentally change how consumers act and to change our everyday lives. If you skip ahead to the next slide, Jennifer, whether it's just the internet in general, or now from 3G to 4G to 5G, whether it's social media, whether it's the massive proliferation of mobile devices, we probably live in an era today where the world changes and events change the world more rapidly than probably at any point in human history. And that's a really interesting sort of concept to accept, that that's our reality. And what that should tell us all as businesses is that we're probably never going to be able to really predict the future. We will never be able to be as proactive as we want to be. Instead, what we have to get really, really, really good at is being reactive. We need to design our companies and our entire industries and our teams to be very nimble, to be flexible, so that whatever it is that comes next, whatever that big, unpredictable, world-changing thing is, we can adapt to it and we can innovate. You can no longer afford to be stubbornly consistent in your business as the world changes around it. The dairy industry can no longer afford to be stubbornly consistent in what you do and how you do it. The world just doesn't work that way anymore. You can click to the next slide, Jennifer. The food category in general is one that it really reinvents itself probably more quickly than most other categories. And it's mostly based on the sudden whims of consumers. And it's easy to see the huge impact of unpredictable trends on companies that really fail or refuse to find new approaches when the world changes. Look at something like high fructose corn syrup, right? Back in, I guess it was the 70s or the 60s it was invented. It was considered this sort of massive breakthrough in the processing of what was essentially a sugar substitute. And for decades, it was considered a huge breakthrough. And it wasn't until much later that it really became a lightning rod in sort of the obesity epidemic in America and really across the world. And to this day, there are still tons of disagreeing information out there that contradicts each other on really the true difference between HFCS and sugar, but that isn't stopping major brands like Coke and Pepsi from shifting back to traditional sugar to keep their customers happy. And if you go to the next slide with MSG, it's similar, but probably an even more frustrating story. In the 60s and 70s, Americans start talking about this idea. They called it Chinese restaurant syndrome. There was even a letter published about it in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1968. People were blaming Chinese restaurants for headaches, for pain in their arm, for heart palpitations. And that sort of blame on Chinese restaurants transitioned, or it narrowed into a blame on the product MSG. And even though today, almost any credible source you'll look into will tell you that complaints against MSG are almost entirely myths, but many people are still afraid to eat the product. So with high fructose corn syrup, the complaints are maybe, let's say, half true. With MSG, the complaints are almost entirely false. But when you're in the dairy industry, you have to understand that this stuff can happen at any time. These claims, these stories, these concerns, and especially when the validity of those claims don't always line up with the impact that the claims have. And some of this has already started, right? As an increasing number of people self-diagnose themselves as being lactose intolerant, or diet trends keep popping up, new diets every day that prioritize low fat or lower calorie, or who knows, maybe at some point they'll claim you should have less calcium or you should have less protein. And some of that sounds crazy and it sounds stupid, but it matters. It matters what customers think, even when they're wrong. And it matters how you react and how quickly you react. And if you go to the next slide, sometimes these changes are so far beyond your control, and it'll feel like they're things that you shouldn't have to worry about because they're so unpredictable and so strange. In 1978, 900 people were involved in the murder-suicide at Jonestown. They drank a cyanide-laced powdered beverage from a brand called Flavor Aid, which was a competitor of Kool-Aid. But in media reports, it was often described as a Kool-Aid beverage, which led to the popular colloquialism, "Don't drink the Kool-Aid." There's a measurable correlation between the events at Jonestown and Kool-Aid's declining sales in the late 70s and early 80s. And it wasn't even Kool-Aid that was used. And I know that in particular probably seems like a very extreme and very specific example, but what all of these things have in common, for the most part, is that things happen not the fault of a brand, not the fault of the products or of the industry, and consumer sentiment gets permanently changed. You have to be willing to constantly ask yourself, what's the worst case scenario? And how might you pivot if it happens? MSG, high fructose corn syrup, Kool-Aid did nothing wrong, but that doesn't mean they don't need to react. It doesn't mean they don't need to change. It doesn't mean that their businesses don't have to reflect these new consumer opinions. When the next animal abuse video comes out, or when Joaquin Phoenix wins his next Oscar and criticizes the dairy industry in his speech, when the next crazy diet trend that comes out from a Kardashian or a Real Housewife of Beverly Hills that tells you don't eat cheese because it causes hair loss or something crazy like that, you have to imagine these scenarios and you have to ask yourself, are you in a position to pivot? If you need to, are you in a position to switch from one core product to another? Could you switch from selling in one market to a different market or to a different types of consumers? Are you in a position to immediately deliver a new communication strategy or a new marketing campaign? If you jump to the next slide, and these things I'm talking about, obviously so unpredictable, like the Kool-Aid story. Kool-Aid never could have seen that coming. It may seem like preparing for those sorts of things are impossible, and it is no doubt extremely hard, but even when the writing's on the wall, it can be equally difficult to convince yourself and your business to break free from your sort of standard operating procedures that we all get extremely comfortable with. This is a website called Ophoto. It was launched in 1999, and it was purchased by photography powerhouse Kodak in 2001, back when they were a photography powerhouse. As you can see, the Ophoto website let Kodak customers do three things. You could buy real Kodak prints, you could share photos online, and you could organize and edit your photos. And based on the usage data at the time, Kodak could see that their customers really wanted to use this platform to do those bottom two things. But the problem was, back in the early 2000s, Kodak is still making the vast majority of its profit from the top bullet, from printing photos. So Ophoto never becomes a top priority for Kodak as a company because it didn't really fit perfectly into how they prioritized their business, into how they made money at the time. So a dozen years before Instagram, a huge company, a leader in photography, you can go to the next slide, who actually had a mission statement, share moments, share life, that is remarkably similar, if you go to the next slide, to the mission of Instagram, which is to capture and share the world's moments. So they were there 12 years first, doing exactly what Instagram now does. And if you go to the next slide, because the product was sort of deprioritized by Kodak, Ophoto was deprioritized. Eventually, they sold off what remained of Ophoto to Shutterfly in 2012, which was right around the time Instagram launched. They sold the remnants for $23 million. And if you jump to the next slide, you'll see that today Instagram is worth over $100 billion. And Kodak was there first, but it was just a little different. It was a little uncomfortable. It didn't fit into their money-making model today. So it became not a priority. And the writing was on the wall. This one wasn't unpredictable. And even beyond the usage data from users, Kodak could have known that digital cameras were the future. It just wasn't their present, because the first ever digital camera was invented 20 years before Ophoto launched by an engineer named Steve Sasson, who worked for Kodak. Kodak invented the first digital camera. But again, it was the future and it wasn't their present, so it wasn't a priority. If you go to the next slide, probably everyone in this room, as you watch or everyone watching in whatever rooms you're in, sorry, I'm used to giving speeches in person, you probably all have tried one of these hard seltzers on this page, as virtually everyone has over the last few years, as hard seltzers have become so incredibly popular. And what happened is this trend emerges, and you can look at it similar to these other stories I've told. A new trend pops up, just as it might in the dairy industry, as the dairy case continues to get filled with soy milk or almond milk or oat milk or avocado milk or whatever the heck kind of milk comes next. So a new thing pops up in the industry, a new competitor, a new threat. Except what happened in the hard seltzer space is that when White Claw really started to launch in 2016, which is really the first hard seltzer to sort of get its claws into our culture and to really push hard. In 2016, when White Claw launched, immediately after, we saw substitutes or competitors coming into the market like Truly and Bon and Viv. And it's really interesting how that happened, because today there are probably 100 different competitors to White Claw, and they continue to launch to this day, including alternatives and competitors from every major beer brand and every major alcohol company, because now they see the size of this market, they see the potential. The reason Truly is in second, which is a product from the Boston Beer Company, which owns Samuel Adams, and the reason Bon and Viv is in third, which is a product by Anheuser-Busch, the largest beer company in the world, is because those two products launched in 2016, months after White Claw, not years after White Claw. So at Anheuser-Busch, when I see this new trend, this new threat, even though it's tiny, just as you might look at soy milk, or just as you might look at a new market as being some new tiny thing, instead of ignoring it, they said, you know what, we're going to get on board this trend. We're going to be a part of it just in case it matters, just in case it's important. And by acting fast, by moving quickly, now they're sucking up huge market share, and they're still behind White Claw, but it just goes to show you it's not always about being first. It's not always about having the invention. It's about how quickly can you react? How quickly can you become a part of the trend? How can you latch onto it? How can you figure out what consumers are looking for and then find a way to make your product, your brand, or your industry a part of it? These brands pivoted, and they did it in smart ways. They did the opposite of what someone like Kodak did. So you go ahead and skip to the next slide. I think this is pretty much it for me. If I had an hour to talk to y'all instead of 10 minutes, what I'd really like to do is talk about how we take this imperative, this need to be innovative and flexible and nimble. How do we start bringing that to life at your company or for your team or for your industry? What are the tangible steps? But again, since I don't have that sort of time, I'd like to recommend an article to you all. It's from 2013 on Fast Company. You can easily Google this and find it. It's a super short read. It probably takes 4 or 5 minutes to read it. Depending on who you want to talk to, Google, which is, again, my home for almost a decade, has anywhere from 5 to 15 what we called cultural principles that drove innovation. Principles that defined simple things like how we set goals, how we brainstormed, how we developed products, and even how we empowered our employees. It's the type of stuff that let us be flexible, that let us move quickly. Again, this article will go through a handful. And if you believe, like I believe, that innovation is a necessity, that true transformational innovation is a necessity. If you, like me, believe that if the dairy industry stays sort of within its standard operating procedures, that it'll decline and decline and decline, that there's nowhere else for dairy to go without innovation, without new ideas, then skim through this, take a look, spend the 5 minutes, and start to brainstorm on ways you can put some of these into your company. And maybe if there's time later during Q&A, we can talk more about this. But and also, if you go to the next slide, just want to say thank you all for listening. Again, I know there's Q&A later, so I'll talk more. But also, if you want somebody to brainstorm with, feel free to reach out. I love that virtual lets us do this kind of stuff, but I miss traveling around and meeting people like all of you. So if you want to talk more about innovation and culture and Google, reach out anytime. My email's here, my website's here. And with that, I think I'm passing it back to John. I'm not totally sure. But thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Steve. We're going to get to questions in just a couple minutes. But first, we're going to transition to the dairy industry and take a look at some real examples of innovation at work in the dairy space. So also joining us today is Donna Berry. Donna is the owner of Dairy and Food Communications, a company that specializes in business-to-business writing, speaking, and consulting projects. She has a bachelor's degree in food science from the University of Illinois and in product development industry experience with Kraft Foods. She has been tracking consumer behaviors and food trends with an emphasis on dairy for more than 25 years. She currently writes for numerous trade publications, including Food Business News, Meat and Poultry, Baking and Snack, and Culinology. If you don't subscribe to her Daily Dose of Dairy blog, you really should. So, Donna, it's all yours.
Well, thank you very much. Steve, I can't agree more with everything that you said, but I really never knew that about the Kool-Aid and those dang Kardashians, man. I eat too much cheese. I think that's why my hair is thinning. So thank you for those tidbits. Go ahead to the next slide. We're going to go pretty quickly through my slides here. But the fact is that during this entire 15 months of, kind of being quarantined, working from home, Innovators have been really aggressive with working, and a lot of startups and entrepreneurs had time to do things. And I can tell you right now that, as the country opens up, we're going to see a lot of new products in the marketplace. I was really fortunate to go to my first in-person trade show last week, Indianapolis. It was the Sweets and Snacks Show. Typically, that's what we used to refer to it as the candy show. And wow, I can tell you, these are people who have been sitting on product for 2 years to be able to show to the industry. And there's a lot of wild stuff going on. So it's going to be a really exciting time. And it's just so critical that the dairy folks don't sit by and do nothing. The white stuff isn't going to sell itself. So go to the next slide. Really quick, we weren't this far back in time, but jump forward. Next slide. We definitely got here a lot faster than we ever thought. Next slide. Whoever thought that we would be getting a pizza delivered by a drone, right? Food delivered this way. It's pretty crazy, but we're here and we have to, I love that word pivot. We have to pivot and get aggressive and partake. So next slide. With what we really need to do though is help, we have to reinvent the experience of, the in nutrition and the qualities and the benefits of dairy, but at the same time, we are competing and up against folks who, as Steve had said, are undermining what our product is. So we need to make sure that we're getting that message out. Next slide, please. So innovation, it's no longer, do I want you to think of a luxury? Next slide. And the reality is that it's not your daddy's dairy anymore. The new norm is a nonlinear world and we're breaking all the rules. So let's go ahead and I'm going to give you an example of what I think is one of the best rule-breaking products out there. So next slide, please. And this is a concept that rolled out right before COVID hit and couldn't have happened at a worse time, right? This is from Dairy Farmers of America. It's their almond and dairy and oat and dairy beverages. And there's 5 actually. The products in the center is the original packaging. The products on the right side are new graphics that they've just come out with. And you could see both of them had that picture on the top right-hand corner where it shows a cow 50% and then it shows the grain or the nut as 50%. But now they've added the descriptor on the bottom. Instead of calling it milk blend, it's real milk with plant goodness. And I really like I think that's going to work very well for them. I think it gets the message out. But talk about rocking the boat and doing something a little different. There's been a lot of criticism of them for doing this, but kudos to them for thinking out of the box and definitely being proactive in a place that we can't just ignore. So next slide. They're not the only ones doing it. So this whole plant-based thing, first of all, I'm the one who wrote the comment this morning when Jim Costa was speaking, and I said plant-based butter equals margarine and plant-based leather equals plastic, and it's true. So, but we can't fight this plant-based thing. So how about putting some plants into dairy? Shamrock has this product. They're focusing just on a single serve concept and just with chocolate. But it's chocolate milk with almond and coconut, or chocolate with just coconut, a beverage. Land O'Lakes just came out with a butter spread that has seeds in it. So you're getting all the inherent nutrition that comes from seeds. And then the Laughing Cow has these new plant blends or cheese and legume blends of spreads. Next slide. And then here we're hiding vegetables into ice cream. The Peekaboo product actually won the California Milk Advisory Board's incubator during the pandemic. Great concept, hidden vegetables in there, and the Yum product is a similar type concept. Next slide. And here are some more unique ways of really boosting up the plant content in dairy. I really love on the up left-hand corner, the Too Good product. This is a Dannon brand. They came out with this limited edition variety where it's using rescued fruit. This is something that is becoming really common in the grain and confection space and even in the beverage space. And I can see this happening a lot more in the dairy area, where these are ugly fruits and vegetables, and which would be then rescued. Product that would never make it into the produce department at the grocery store, but yet it can be processed into a fruit puree and added into dairy. And that is the type of plant benefits that some consumers are looking for. Rescuing this fruit. You have Yoplait here, which has a smoothie product, which has 50% more fruit. Oikos on the bottom just rolled out a product that has double the amount of fruit. And then the Icelandic version with fruits and nuts. So again, you're getting the whole food nutrition from the dairy, but you're getting the plant benefits as well. Next slide, please. And of course, don't even need to go into how many examples we have of these new cheese types of snacking trays, but what are they? Many of them are incorporating cheese with plants. We have nuts, seeds, dried fruits. Many of them have meats, but endless opportunity here, and they can be adult-centric, children-centric, or ready for entertainment. Next slide. This cheese board product, really, really super cool. It is cheese where the nuts and fruit are actually incorporated into this cheese slice. It's called a snacking bar, so it's kind of like a all-in-one charcuterie type product. So again, talking about getting those plant ingredients in with dairy. Now the Sargento product, I'm going to kind of pivot over here and talk a little bit more about cheese opportunities. And just when you thought like shredded cheddar cheese can't be more creative, now Sargento has this creamery product where they say they add extra cream to it, so it's extra creamy and meltable. Next slide. And what else can you do with cheese? Well, you can dehydrate it and dry it, and you can do that into puffs and crackers and sticks and bars, and it's 100% cheese just dried. And then you can create these cheese wraps where there's a couple players out there in this space. Basically, it's 100% cheese cut into the form of what looks like a tortilla, and use it instead of a tortilla. And guess who is loving all these products? All those folks on the low carb diets, high protein diets, and especially the keto followers. Next slide, please. Here's taking snacking cheese and adding value, extra nutrition into it. The Baby Bell has the vitamin enhanced one and then the probiotic plus one. And again, going for value added nutrition. And a lot of it had to do with immunity as well during the pandemic. So was perfectly poised to hit the marketplace during this time. Next slide. Just to show you that yogurt itself doesn't need to be in a cup. These are yogurt bars, refrigerated product that is enrobed in chocolate. And then this pouch product for kids where it's fortified and enhanced with extra nutrition for their growing years, as the name suggests. Next slide. Shamrock Farms out there in Arizona, they have been at the forefront of providing these protein enhanced beverages, basically sports and refuel type products, but they've really gone the extra length, and they have, a product with antioxidants. They have one with tart cherries, energy product that has caffeine in it. The array that they offer is just incredible. And talk about being ready to, not to be ready to hit the marketplace when the next trend hits. They have the packaging, the processing to fill these types of products. Just producing labels is a pretty quick thing to do. And they're out there ready to go as soon as the next trend or fad hits the marketplace. But they want to be in it, and they'll be in it quick, just like those hard seltzer folks. Next slide. And Fairlife, another, very innovative company here who has now expanded beyond their original product, Fairlife Milk. They're in creamers, they're in protein beverages, they have an ice cream product, and now they have this lactose-free product with less sugar in it as well. Next slide. This is one of those, if you haven't tasted this product, and I don't think it's available on the West Coast, it's in the Midwest. Very interesting concept. These truly are zero sugar products, and the white milks are not sweetened. It's very strange taste to taste milk that has no sugar in it. And it's after a while you get really used to it, and then you realize how sweet milk can be. But the idea here is that these are organic products, and it's to keep parents involved with giving their kids milk when they really are trying to eliminate all sugar from the diet. And the kids who've never had sweetened milk won't really know the difference. So again, pushing the envelope, thinking outside the box. Next slide, please. And this zero sugar thing is a trend. I can tell you right now at the Sweets and Snacks show last week, you would not believe how many candy bar concepts. Now, again, we're talking chocolate and candy bar concepts are zero sugar. They are being sweetened with products, rather newer sweeteners in the marketplace that can be described as natural, such as stevia, monk fruit, and allulose would be the big three. But zero sugar is a very hot claim right now in all food and beverage space. Next slide. Chobani, just to show you, I mean, we all know what Chobani started out with Greek yogurt, and now they're ready to respond to trends in the marketplace. They have the little Chobani probiotic product there, came out during the pandemic, and it talks about building immunity. I mean, what parent would not want to give their little loved one a beverage that's full of protein, full of nutrition, and will also help them fight off any germs and viruses. Next slide. Good Sport. If you have not heard about this product, and I'm not going to be able to say it quick enough to get it through, I highly recommend you Google it. This is a isotonic beverage, much like Gatorade, but also not like Gatorade. Its primary ingredient, and I believe it's 97% of the ingredient, it is milk permeate. It's permeate left over with all the electrolytes that are naturally in milk. It is not a protein beverage. In fact, there's zero protein in it. It is truly an isotonic based on the electrolytes and the vitamins found in milk. Very cool story, very cool product, and I'm pretty sure it's going to do quite well. Next slide, please. Just some more kids type beverages and then adult type beverages. Who knew, or what took so long for them to put protein in a juice pouch for kids, as well as drinkable like nutrition shakes, and then taking chocolate milk and making it upscale for adults in those cans. Next slide. And I believe I'm almost done, so don't fear. Gonna throw this out there. This is cellular proteins. This is Perfect Day. This is vegan whey proteins in ice cream. It's because it's too expensive to put into probably nutritional beverages, which would be a great application. Next slide. And just the dessert area, I know we're gonna talk a little bit about that maybe during Q&A, so let's go to the next slide. Hard alcohol, this is with dairy in it. There's vodka made from whey proteins and hard coffee with dairy and booze. Next slide. Next slide. Uh-oh, are we frozen? The good news is there's not much left. I'm not seeing the next slide. And the timer's still going. I only had a couple more slides, so if you just want to actually, oh, there we go. Okay, so ice cream that's functional at the top there, and yogurt with extra whole food nutrition with benefits. Next slide. Just ice cream products where you're really thinking outside the box. Those Klondike shakes in the bottom, really different. Just different textures. Textures are a really big trend right now in the ice cream category. Next slide. Seasonal limited edition cheeses. Next slide. Just dairy being used as the primary component in everything from dressings to cooking sauces. Next slide. And finally, this is the last one. Dairy is getting into the egg bites business, but just basically thinking outside of the gallon and the actual milk dairy case, and putting dairy into other categories. Next slide. And this is how I'll end. So basically, if you are always trying to be normal, you will never know how amazing you can be. So I want all you folks to stop being normal, because we have a new norm and we don't know what that is, as Steve just said. So stop being normal and get amazing, because I know it's in everybody. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Donna. As always, a whirlwind tour through the dairy case. Fabulous stuff. All right, we're going to go into some questions now, and I've got a few that I'll give to each of you, and then certainly from the audience, if you want to put a question in the chat, we will get to those as many as we can. So Steve, let me go back to you, and you and I have talked many times about resource allocation. What percent of time and budget do innovative companies reserve for innovation?
Yeah, I hope y'all can still hear me. My internet was cutting out there for a second, but I think I'm in. Yeah, what percentage of time? Yeah, we have talked about this before. There's a model that a lot of folks use, and I know we talked about it a lot at Google, called it like a 70-20-10 rule. And I don't know that the exact numbers matter. You know, every company's different. But the idea of the 70-20-10, and this was kind of at a company level and at an individual level. It was basically the idea that 70% of your time is your core function. It's what you do, it's how you make money. 20% of your time gets spent on sort of related supporting projects. So similar things, but not necessarily the core. But that means 10% of your time is supposed to be reserved for the really outside the box, the really futuristic, the long term, the game changers, the totally unrelated. And at first sound 10% might not sound that much, but 10% is actually quite a bit. That means 4 hours a week if you work a 40-day week, or 5 hours if you work a 50-hour week, whatever it is, where you're spending time thinking about something that's really outside the box. So it actually ends up being a lot of time. Again, it's different for everybody, but really having intentional time for the truly outside the box is the starting point. Even if it's 1 hour a week, to truly just dream crazy for 1 hour a week is a good place to start.
Awesome. Great. You know, another thing, Steve, you hear a lot is companies need to think of themselves as a technology company. What does that mean for dairy?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I do hear that phrase a lot, and I think sometimes the word technology scares people because we think in terms of engineers and programming and code, and I think what that really means is just getting out of the frame of mind of thinking of yourself as like, we make milk, we sell milk, people drink milk, we are milk. Like it's just about more than that. And I think what it really is about understanding your processes, understanding your skill sets, your knowledges, understanding that in the production of something like milk and the delivery of milk and the packaging of milk, there's actually a lot of really specific learned behaviors that can apply to a lot of other things. And it's not to say, oh, you know how to make milk, you should now sell.
All right. Steve?
You
Looks
froze.
like we have lost Steve.
Understanding what? Yep,
Are you there?
I am.
Yep, you're back.
Okay, so I don't know how much you got there, how much you lost, but it was basically just the idea of really understanding what you know that other people don't know, what you can do that other people can't do, what resources you have that other people don't have that can be applied to anything. You can't have a narrow focus on we are exactly this, because you probably know how to do a lot that you don't realize is valuable. So technology doesn't necessarily mean programming and code.
Great. Well, a fun, scary, altogether idea there. Donna, let's go back to you. You know, there's a lot of talk these days about functional foods, and I know you gave a lot of examples in your 10-minute whirlwind there that probably are considered functional foods. But talk a little bit about what is a functional food. What are some of the more popular segments of functional foods? What are the more promising segments of functional foods?
Well, call me crazy, but I think I heard last week that milk has been described as the original functional food with 13 nutrients. So, you know, first of all, the idea of functional foods is, I've been writing about them for 30 years. So it's not something that's a fad. It has become the norm. People expect, you know, yes, they want some indulgence here and there and a treat, but I mean, people expect their foods to work for them and to provide the nutrients. It's mindful snacking. It's conscious consuming, whatever you want to call it. And the idea, so what are they looking for? there definitely is a trend towards looking for foods that contain other food ingredients in the form of whole food nutrition that delivers. So when you can see like the yogurt product with seeds and nuts or fruits and nuts, people want to get their vitamin C, their phytonutrients, their antioxidants from blueberries, not necessarily popping an antioxidant pill. And so the more whole and complete visually that you can show that the product contains it, the more appealing it seems to be to consumers. And that does seem the way the industry is kind of rolling right now. You'll see it in pretty much all categories. Even just with the sweets and snack show last week, you'd be amazed at how many bar type product concepts have, you can see the layers of whole nuts. Kind is actually a really good example. Kind has come out with these frozen bars, which are magnificent. They are non-dairy, and I really wish that they would make them with dairy, but the number one ingredient on there is peanuts. And when you bite into it, you're seeing whole pieces of peanuts in there, and so you know that you're getting, I know I'm getting the protein from that. So the functional foods category is not off the wall crazy stuff. It's whole foods that are working for you, inherently nutritious.
And what are some of the segments that are either doing really well or have a lot of potential opportunity there?
Well, I said fruits, nuts, and seeds, I think, and even whole grains being used as ingredients in I guess dairy applications. It really, you can do it with almost everything, except probably milk, or otherwise it's not going to be dairy milk, and well, except for the one product from DFA. But snacking is a huge opportunity, and then even I think in the frozen segment, in the novelty category, you don't want to do something in a larger size, but single serve novelties, cups, really easy way to add different whole food ingredients in there and deliver it to the consumer. So
excellent, very good. And another area that we shouldn't overlook, but it's areas or products, product categories that may use dairy as an ingredient. Maybe talk a little bit about that and what you see there.
Well, there's definitely a lot of that going on. And I think that Good Sport example actually is, you would look at it and you wouldn't realize that contains permeate. Okay, so very, and it's not a dairy company making it. It's a beverage company that's making it. It's actually a sports mom who quit her law job to be going to making sports beverages for her kid because she wasn't satisfied with what Gatorade was in the marketplace. So it's a very interesting story, but nevertheless, that is using a dairy ingredient, and we're seeing I just wrote an article like earlier this week on titanium dioxide and the issues surrounding that in the industry right now. And anybody who worked in the 90s in product development, which I did at Kraft, and I was commissioned to work on fat-free cheese, and I'll say this once and I said it again, the word fat-free and cheese do not belong in the same sentence together. But the solution when you try to take the milk fat out of cheese to give it that visual appeal, that creaminess, was to add a slurry of titanium dioxide to it. This is the same stuff that's in liquid paper and paint, okay? So kind of gross. And we lost Steve, I think, for good. Yep. I hope maybe he's a fan of titanium dioxide. No. But anyway, dairy ingredients are one of the most all-natural ways to add opacity to foods and add creaminess. Think about it. Powdered buttermilk, powdered butter, whole milk powder, even some of the specialty ingredients. So I see as people are trying to clean up their labels, and there is this issue with this titanium dioxide because the European Food Agency has deemed it to be unsafe. So I think that's going to happen over here. But I think there's going to be a huge opportunity for dairy ingredients to replace some of these artificial colors and man-made ingredients.
Well, Donna, you mentioned Good Sport, and there's a question in the chat here about Good Sport, a product concept that has been around for many years, So timing, positioning, and execution of the product is a good innovation recipe, or does Good Sport have something else going for it?
Well, I don't know if I can actually answer that. And it's true. I mean, I did not realize that there was another isotonic beverage, clear isotonic beverage out there that would have used Permeate in the marketplace. I didn't think Permeate was that readily available for many years ago. So I did not know that product was there. I do know that it probably is some positioning and execution. I know that it was developed in conjunction with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So sorry about California people there, but it was something that a lot of effort went into, and I think the key here is it was the person who developed focused all her energy on it. And I'm assuming that Steve would probably have to agree with something like this, in the sense that when you're going to get creative, you have to put your all into it when you're going to innovate. You cannot slack off. I mean, you have to invest, you have to have investors, you have to have a good brand name, but I mean, you have to sample, test, do studies, get out there. It's not going to sell for itself on the shelf. And as folks do more online shopping, you need to figure out ways to get in front of them, because otherwise they're just buying the same cart that they did the week before and they're not browsing the aisle. So you have to, marketing is critical in the innovation space. Steve, you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a marketer by background, so certainly I feel that same way. I mean, if it's something new and you're not explaining why it matters, then yeah, you become irrelevant real quick. So I'm with you.
And I think that's been a lot of the challenge, though, I'm going to say, in the dairy spaces. It used to be the mentality of, we make it, they'll buy it. And that's not the case. If you're going to be creative, you need to educate, without a doubt.
And you're both starting to get at this, but one of the things I definitely wanted to get into is when you look at companies that do innovation well, what is the difference there between those that do well and those that aren't playing the game?
I used to say this to a lot of people, that it starts with just being loud about the fact that you want this. And it sounds so corny to kind of say. It's like a business leader standing up and sending an email to all the employees and saying, hey, starting today, we are really going to care and really want to hear new ideas and new approaches. And it sounds like nothing, but it really is significant. Creating little contests of, hey, does anybody have any cool ideas? And we'll do a Shark Tank, or just this cheesy little stuff to start to change the attitude, to let people know that this matters to us now. I say this all the time, but like at Google, when I tell these stories about Google's innovation does not start with engineers and programmers. It starts with a leader telling his team, hey, you can go think differently for a while, and hey, you have this freedom. And some of the most innovative companies of all time are, Standard Oil and Carnegie Steel and Vanderbilt, the like robber barons who built the country before there were computers, and they found ways to just do things differently. So it starts with empowering people. That's my short version of my answer.
And I would say there's a company called Simple Mills based out of Chicago. They're a gluten-free cracker cereal company. Read some case studies on them if anyone wants to see an example of exactly what Steve just said about getting excited. These people there live and breathe, or at least maybe not so much anymore, but in the beginning stages. And the employees were told, you take home cases of product, and when you're at your kid's little league game, you're passing them out to people. I think that in the food space, one of the most important things is sampling and going to trade shows, but exhibiting at trade shows. And if you don't have the money to do that, then you shouldn't be doing it. But I mean, I can't emphasize that enough. You could be here, you might have to work long hours to do it, and you might be the one doing it, but don't chintz out on samples. I mean, I'm amazed at people who don't want to have, it's a food, you have to try it. Or who go to a trade show and say, oh, we're just going to walk the show floor, we're not exhibiting. I'm sorry, do you think buyers are just going to walk up to you and say, oh, you look like an interesting person. Do you have something that in your back pocket that you want to sell me? So again, just so important that if you're not going to do it right, don't do it. And nothing is better than getting product out there, bringing it over, bringing it to, again, kids functions, a school, donate it to a school. Say, hey, we got this great new kids yogurt. Would love to, try it out. Examples like that. I mean, it was difficult this last year, obviously, but moving forward, that is crucial.
I think I've heard that saying somewhere. Just do it.
Just do it.
Could not be more relevant here for sure. So this is maybe a little underhanded question for you, but there are those that will say that milk is already a superfood. Donna, you mentioned that. Do we need more new products or do we need more new marketing?
Well, I mean, I could take a stab.
Sure.
The reality is that the consumers have their products, their mainstays that they buy, their staples. They are right now itching to get to the stores, to walk up and down the aisles, to see new things. It has to be a constant process. Up until COVID, the retail ice cream market has pretty much been flat for about the past 20 years. But as you know, new products keep coming in and out of that category. Vanilla Gallon will always be there, that kind of thing. So one person's sales one brand or product sales come at the expense of another's. And you don't want to be the one that the expense is being made of. You want to be the one stealing it from somebody else. So limited edition flavors, products, teaming up with local, philanthropies or whatever the case is, and putting that on your product. It's simple, but that's innovation, and it keeps the consumer curious. They know, oh, there might be something new in that space. I would like to try it out. And so marketing is important, don't get me wrong there, but the innovation, and the big guys are doing it. I mean, I just saw this week, or I just featured today, Yoplait just came out with a Skittles yogurt. Sounds a little too sweet for me, but it's a limited edition. You see it, they do great job with marketing, getting the messaging out there. People see it, they want to go buy it. They go to the store, they try it. They may not try it again, but they've tried it. And the next one will come out. So once you get a new product out there and you're innovating, it's not done. It's a constant process.
Got to have that pipeline. Fill the pipeline, right? Steve, anything else?
Yeah, I'll just add real quick. I know we're coming up towards time. Just for everyone who's watching, and I don't know who everyone is, but also just keep in mind too that innovation can really mean a lot of different things. And I think as far as the dairy industry goes, I think a lot of what Donna said is super important. The new products, the categories, the stealing share, not letting share get stolen, but also there's so much innovation to be had in process. And I'm a big believer in process innovation as well. 1/10 of a percentage point gain in how efficiently you're processing your milk, or tiny changes to the packaging. Like now a plastic gallon of milk seems so obvious and so definitive, but there was a very long time where milk was sold in glass bottles, and I'm sure they thought that was it. We did it. We got the glass bottle. We're good. It until you come up with the next thing that no one had dreamed up yet. So when you think about innovation, think about any little way you can improve. Any marginal gains are huge. Process, packaging, your plant, your workers, your structure, and yes, your product, and yes, your marketing. But you can innovate in a million different parts of your business. Who you sell to, what markets you prioritize, how much are you shipping overseas. There's a million ways to innovate. Don't limit it to one thing. Any idea is a good idea if it can give you even the smallest improvement.
And packaging and graphics are key. And if you're not going to be changing your product mix up, you can constantly recreate and the packaging, the visual, the messaging, and that keeps it alive as well too.
Great. There's a question in the chat here. How do dairy standards, regulations, and pricing policy influence the motivation for innovation?
Negatively.
Yeah. I think anything that complicates or add extra features just leans in towards that attitude where people have of comfort in consistency, of feeling like things are good. I don't want to rock the boat. There's all these things I have to worry about, all these regulations, all these standards, all these things that Philip mentioned in the chat. So I think that just increases the fear and the complacency, I'd say, which is certainly not ideal. But again, innovation can be very small things too, and it can start small and grow from there. And again, like the policies are what they are until they change, right? Or until someone changes them, until someone asks the question of, hey, I think it'd be better this way because I invented this new thing. And so again, it starts with a little effort and a little intent. And then as Donna put it, at some point, somebody's got to get real serious about it. Somebody's got to get real serious about it. But it starts with some ideation and some brainstorming. But yeah, don't let anything, policy or otherwise, make you feel complete. Is the death of every industry eventually.
And actually, that's where dairy ingredients really do come into play, because that changes a lot of the regulations in production as well, if you're using dried products versus raw fluid milk. So, again, that's an assistance to make you think out the box.
Great. Well, we're just about to wrap here, but let me finish with one final question that they threw at me yesterday and see how you guys think about it. But what most excites you about the future of dairy?
I thought you meant just generally about the future, like aliens or something. It's going to be about dairy. This is kind of, or sorry, Don, do you want to go first?
No, you can go ahead.
I think, and this is kind of a weird answer to say, but John and I talk about this a lot, about the threat of competitors and substitutes and plant-based. And I think those threats are so very real. I think that there's every reason to assume that the technology that creates lab-based stuff will evolve and get better and cheaper and more efficient in every way. And I think we'll get to a point where, to me, when I talk to folks in the dairy industry, and I speak at a lot of conferences, I talk to a lot of CEOs, I feel like there is still a hesitance to really leap, a hesitance to feel the need to really leap. And I think that point is coming and getting closer, where we look at what plant-based is doing, we look at all these alternatives, and they start getting better. And I think there's a point where dairy is going to start to take technology as seriously and alternatives as seriously as some other folks do. So I'm excited for dairy to go all in on technology and change, and really just to get uncomfortable. We used to say that all the time at Google. To be uncomfortably excited is a really good thing. And I think dairy is getting to that point where, yeah, it's time to get a little kick in the pants and get going on some of these things. So I'm excited for that.
No, that's great. Donna?
I think I'm going to be a little opposite on the spectrum. I'm excited for the words plant-based to go away, kind of like fat-free. I just think it's overused, it's being diluted, and the messaging is wrong. And I think that that's one of the best things that could happen to the dairy industry, is for the words plant-based to go away. Now, I'm not saying the words non-dairy that will remain. There's definitely a consumer who wants a non-dairy creamer, a non-dairy cheese style product, or I'm not going to debate the names right now, but the word plant-based, I just can't stand it anymore. And I know it's on its way out. I mean, it really is. People are, again, you could say vegan, vegetarian, there's just so many other words, but plant-based is, I think, the meaning, it is being diluted in the industry. And, that's where I'm excited about, and I think it'll be and then the dairy industry can start getting on with all the technology and getting creative. But stop worrying about these words plant-based and maybe focus on creating a non-dairy product. But I don't know. You were around in the fat-free craze. You know how insane that was. And look where we are today. Fat, people are just drinking creamer out of the container. I mean, fat is a beautiful thing. It was, and I think the plant-based thing is just overused, the language. And I read that this morning that Dunkin' Donuts removed their plant-based breakfast sandwich off the menu.
Yep.
And, and so, why? Because it's not a good breakfast sandwich, or at least in my opinion. But, people will speak with their dollars. So again, non-dairy is, you make a coconut cream, whatever you want to call it, yogurt, it's pretty darn good. I mean, so that's okay. But to, anyway, that's what excites me, keeps me
All
up.
right. Well, that's great. Some very provocative thoughts from both of you, and really appreciate your time and input. There's a lot to come, and it should all be fun. But at any rate, thanks to our audience. Just a reminder that we kick off again tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., our final day of CCOA. Thank you all for attending. Take care.
Bye.